The princess who was overlooked. In the Grand Forum of the Stellar Alliance, a massive gathering of the galaxy's most powerful species was underway. Representatives from hundreds of worlds crowded the hall, their voices blending into a hum of intense negotiations, declarations of war, and the constant shuffling of interests. The very air seemed thick with the weight of authority and dominance, as empires and monarchs, diplomats, and generals sought to carve their influence across the stars. But among all these imposing figures, one individual stood out for a different reason. Princess Lyra of the Scylla, small and unassuming, could hardly be seen in the sea of towering beings that filled the hall. Her people, the Scylla, were known for their exceptional intellect and agility, but their small stature had long led to their dismissal in the eyes of the galactic powers. At just under a meter tall, Lyra was overlooked and ignored, her presence barely noticeable in the midst of giants, both figuratively and literally. Clad in the finest silver and indigo fabrics, her royal robes shimmered under the artificial lights of the forum, their intricate design reflecting the legacy of her people. A delicate crown made of iridescent crystals rested atop her head, catching the light with each movement she made. Despite her regal attire, Lyra could feel the weight of the dismissive stares of the other delegates. They passed by her without a second glance, their eyes skimming over her as though she were nothing more than an afterthought in the vast tapestry of the galaxy's politics. "I see the princess has arrived," muttered a voice nearby. Lyra's chest tightened at the familiar insult. It wasn't just the whispers, it was the tone, the underlying scorn. The Scylla, once respected innovators, had become shadows of their former selves. Their technology and advancements had once shaped the very fabric of the galaxy, but as larger species rose to power, their contributions were forgotten, dismissed, and overlooked. Lyra's people were now considered weak, irrelevant, and expendable. And no matter how hard she tried to stand tall, to represent the hopes of her father and the Scylla, she couldn't escape the weight of her own insignificance in the eyes of the Alliance. Her violet eyes scanned the crowd, but she quickly looked away, not wanting to be caught in the piercing gazes of the larger species. Among the delegates, she was nothing more than a curiosity, a princess that no one wanted. Her mission, her father's final hope for the Scylla's recognition, seemed more and more like a lost cause with each passing day. An Orion general, standing at least 6 feet tall with skin like molten stone, sauntered past her, his eyes filled with disdain. A princess. No one wants what a tragedy, he sneered as he walked by, his voice echoing in the vast hall. Lyra's hands clenched under her sleeves, her nails digging into her palms as she tried to keep her composure. She couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. This was her moment to prove that the Scylla were more than their size, that they were worthy of being recognized, that their legacy was still relevant. But the galaxy had no place for someone like her. At least, that's what they believed. The hum of the crowd drowned out her thoughts as she moved away from the assembly, her steps purposeful, though heavy with the weight of countless rejections. She needed air. She needed a moment away from the insults, the dismissals, and the constant reminder of how small she was. Lyra stepped onto a small balcony overlooking the bustling city of the Forum, the golden hues of the setting suns casting long shadows over the spires that rose around her. The city below was alive, its streets filled with the bustle of commerce and politics. But up here, on this quiet balcony, she could almost forget the noise. "I'm wasting my time," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft winds. "They'll never listen. The galaxy has already decided. I'll never change their minds." Her words hung in the air, the weight of them sinking deep into her chest. She could feel the coldness of despair creeping in. But before she could retreat into the silence of her own thoughts, a voice startled her. "Hey, are you okay?" Lyra spun around, her heart racing. Standing just a few feet away was a man she hadn't noticed before. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a uniform of the Earth Coalition. His posture was casual, but there was a sense of awareness in the way his eyes scanned the area. Steel blue eyes, and something in them, something different. I didn't mean to startle you, he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. Lyra blinked in confusion. Who are you? The man smiled faintly, his voice calm. Captain Marcus Hale, Earth Coalition. Just making sure you weren't about to jump off the balcony. Lyra's brow furrowed, and she shook her head. What do you want? I'm just here, observing, Marcus replied, his tone light. But I was curious. Everyone in there seems to either ignore you or insult you. I couldn't figure out why. Because I'm small. Lyra's voice was flat, a lifetime of hurt lacing her words. Because I'm Scylla. Because my people aren't important. Marcus crossed his arms, his gaze steady. Important to who? To the galaxy. Lyra stared at him, stunned. Most people would have either pity or scorn in their eyes when they looked at her. But Marcus, he simply looked at her, as though she were just another person, another individual worth seeing. Well, the galaxy sounds like an idiot, he said bluntly. Lyra's eyes widened, taken aback by his boldness. She didn't know whether to be offended or grateful. His words weren't flowery, weren't political. They were just honest. For the first time in days, she felt the weight of her shoulders lighten, just a little. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For the first time, someone had seen her, not as a joke, not as a failure, but as a person. Marcus didn't flinch under her gaze. He didn't look at her with pity or disgust. He simply saw her. And for Lyra, that meant more than all the galaxy's power combined. What's your name? She asked quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Marcus, he replied, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. And you're not nearly as insignificant as they think you are, Princess Lyra. Lyra turned away, her cheeks flushed, but she couldn't stop the small smile that tugged at her lips. She didn't know it yet, but this human soldier, standing before her, would change the course of her life, and perhaps in turn, the course of the galaxy itself. For the first time in years, Lyra didn't feel invisible. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. The unlikely alliance. The forum was still alive with the buzz of political maneuvering and heated debates, but in the silence of the balcony, a different kind of conversation was unfolding between Princess Lyra and Captain Marcus Hale. The two stood there, in an uneasy but profound stillness, each processing the brief exchange they had just shared. For Lyra, the words Marcus had spoken felt like an unexpected balm to a wound she had carried for far too long. She was used to being overlooked, used to feeling small, unimportant, and discarded by the galaxy she had once dreamed of changing. Yet, standing beside this human officer, she felt something she had not felt in ages, a flicker of hope. What did you mean by that? Lyra asked softly, her voice steady but laced with curiosity. About the galaxy being an idiot. Marcus took a deep breath, his gaze still fixed on the distant skyline of Forum City, where the three setting suns cast long shadows across the horizon. I meant it exactly as I said it, he replied, his tone calm but with an edge of conviction. The galaxy is obsessed with size, power, and influence, but that doesn't mean those are the only things that matter. If the galaxy can't see your worth, that's their mistake, not yours. Lyra turned her eyes to the vast expanse below them, the golden spires stretching out in every direction, a reminder of the vastness of the world around her. It's easy for you to say, she murmured, her gaze softening. You're human. You're tall. Strong. Your people have built their reputation. They've carved their place in the galaxy. But Scylla, we're small. We've been forgotten, and no one cares to remember us. No one sees our value. I'm not denying that, Marcus said, his voice softening as well. But sometimes, it's the things that others overlook, the things that seem insignificant, that can change the course of history. Your people's past, their intellect, their contributions, those things are still valuable, even if the galaxy doesn't acknowledge them. You've got a lot more to offer than they realize. Lyra swallowed hard. the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. He wasn't wrong. But how could she make the galaxy see what was so easily dismissed? How could she prove that the Skila were still worth something in this universe that had moved on without them? The problem, Lyra said, her voice tight, is that everyone in that forum, every single one of them, believes that size, power, and strength are the only things that matter. I can't change their minds. I can't force them to see what I know to be true about my people. Marcus looked down at her, his gaze steady and unwavering. Maybe you don't need to change their minds. Maybe all you need to do is show them something they've never seen before, something they didn't expect. Lyra blinked, confused. What do you mean? You've got something they don't, Marcus said, his voice low and purposeful. You've got a heart that isn't bound by the rules of size or power. You've got the determination and the intelligence to push forward when others would give up. In the end, it's not about how big you are or how much muscle you have. It's about what you do with what you have. Lyra's gaze softened as she took in his words. She had always thought her smallness was a curse, a burden that weighed her down. But Marcus saw it differently. For the first time, she began to see her people's plight in a new light, not as something to be ashamed of, but as something to be proud of. Lyra's gaze softened as she took in his words. She had always thought her smallness was a curse, a burden that weighed her down. But Marcus saw it differently. For the first time, she began to see her people's plight in a new light, not as something to be ashamed of, but as something to be proud of. The Skila may have been small in stature, but they were resilient, and that resilience was something that could not be measured by height or strength alone. Before Lyra could respond, the sound of footsteps interrupted their quiet conversation. A voice echoed in the distance, its tone commanding and harsh. "Princess Lyra, we need to talk." Lyra's body stiffened, her gaze snapping to the source of the voice. A tall, imposing figure emerged from the shadows, a delegate from the Galactic High Council. His uniform was ornate, with gold trimmings and symbols of power that spoke of his high status in the galaxy. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Lyra with disdain. "I didn't realize you were having a private conversation, Princess," the delegate continued, his words dripping with mockery. "But it's time to face reality. Your people are irrelevant, and so is your petition for Skila recognition." Lyra's heart sank. She had expected this. She had expected more rejection, more scorn. But Marcus, standing beside her, didn't flinch. His gaze locked with the delegates, his posture shifting into something more commanding. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but laced with authority. The delegate sneered, clearly not expecting any resistance. "No problem at all, Captain. Just reminding the princess of her place. The Skila are insignificant, and no amount of pleading will change that." Marcus didn't move, his gaze still fixed on the delegate. "Maybe you're the one who needs reminding. The galaxy doesn't get to decide what matters. And maybe, just maybe, it's time for the Skila to be heard, whether you like it or not." The delegate's sneer faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "This is not your concern, Captain. Stay out of it." Lyra could feel the tension rising in the air. She could feel the weight of her people's history, their struggle, pressing down on her. But this time, it didn't feel like she was alone. Marcus, the human soldier who had seen her not as a joke, but as someone worth fighting for, stood by her side. For the first time in ages, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her. "You're right," Marcus said, stepping forward. "This is between the princess and me. And I think it's time you left." The delegate glared at Marcus, but after a tense moment, he turned and stormed off, his footsteps echoing in the distance. Lyra turned to Marcus, her heart racing. "You didn't have to do that. He's a delegate from the High Council. I don't care about his title," Marcus said, his tone firm. "What matters is that no one should be treated like they don't matter. No one should be dismissed because of their size or their race." Lyra's eyes widened, her chest swelling with emotion. "Thank you, Marcus. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied, his voice softening. "But I'm not going anywhere. I'm here to help you, Princess. If you're ready to take a stand, I'll be with you every step of the way." For the first time, Lyra felt like she had someone in her corner. Someone who saw her for who she truly was, not as an insignificant princess from a forgotten race, but as a person worthy of recognition. Together, they would face the challenges ahead. Together, they would rewrite the story of the Scylla. And perhaps, just perhaps, they would prove that even the smallest among the stars could change the galaxy. The spark of change. The days that followed were a blur of meetings and tense discussions. The atmosphere in the forum remained charged with the weight of endless political deals and negotiations, but for Princess Lyra, the presence of Marcus Hale brought a new sense of determination. It wasn't that his words had given her a concrete plan or an easy path to success, but in some quiet, unspoken way, his belief in her and the Scylla people had reignited something in her heart, a fire she hadn't realized had almost gone out. Lyra was used to being ignored, used to being dismissed as a mere afterthought in the grand scheme of the galaxy. But as the days wore on, she began to notice a subtle shift. The whispers that had once followed her every step grew quieter. The sneers that had greeted her every time she entered a room grew less frequent. It was as if the other delegates were beginning to wonder why Marcus Hale, a respected officer of the Earth Coalition, had taken an interest in this insignificant princess from a forgotten race. The more they watched him, the more curious they became about her. And all the while, Marcus stood by her side. He attended her meetings, stood silently in the back of rooms where discussions were held, and occasionally spoke when it was necessary. But his most valuable contribution wasn't in his words. It was in the unshakable support he offered her simply by being there. He was the steady presence in the chaos of the forum, the quiet assurance that she wasn't alone in this fight. One evening, after another long and fruitless day of negotiations, Lyra found herself back on the balcony where it had all started. The view was the same. The golden spires of Forum City stretched out before her, bathed in the soft light of the setting suns. She had come here often, in moments of frustration, to gather her thoughts and center herself. Tonight, however, she wasn't alone. Marcus was there again, standing quietly by the railing, watching the city below. His gaze was thoughtful, his posture relaxed but alert. He didn't speak at first, content to simply share the silence with her. But after a few moments, he broke it with a simple question. "How are you holding up?" Lyra looked at him, her expression a mix of weariness and resolve. "I'm tired, Marcus. Tired of being ignored, tired of trying to prove myself to people who don't care. It feels like I'm running in circles, chasing something that will always be out of reach." Marcus turned to face her, his expression softening. "I know it's hard, but you've come this far. You're not giving up now, are you?" Lyra shook her head, though the exhaustion weighed heavily on her. "No, I can't. But it's difficult, Marcus. Every time I step into one of those meetings, I can feel their eyes on me, judging me. They don't care about what I have to say, about what my people have to offer. They only care about power and dominance. And no matter what I do, I can't change that." Marcus stepped closer, his voice steady and firm. "Maybe it's not about changing them. Maybe it's about showing them something they haven't seen before, something they can't ignore." Lyra met his gaze, her heart racing with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "What do you mean?" "I mean that your people, the Scylla, they've been written off because of their size. But you're more than that, Lyra. You've got a history of innovation, a culture that has shaped the galaxy in ways they've forgotten. Your people may be small, but that doesn't mean they can't stand tall. All you have to do is remind the galaxy what you're capable of. Not through words, not through pleading, but through action." Lyra's breath caught in her throat as his words sank in. For so long, she had been trying to convince the galaxy of her worth. She had fought for recognition, hoping that someone would finally see what her people were capable of. But Marcus was right. She didn't need to convince them. She needed to show them. What kind of action? Lyra asked, her voice quieter now, but laced with curiosity. Marcus paused for a moment, clearly thinking it through. What if we demonstrated what the Skila can do? What if we took on a task, a mission, something important that would prove your people's worth without any need for words or begging? Show them that your people's intellect and ingenuity can make a difference, no matter their size. Lyra's mind raced as the idea began to take shape. She had always known the potential of the Skila people. They were brilliant engineers, accomplished scientists, and innovators. But the galaxy had forgotten their worth, buried beneath centuries of prejudice and misunderstanding. If she could present a challenge that only the Skila could solve, it would be a clear demonstration of their value. And it could be the key to gaining the recognition her people so desperately needed. I think I know what we can do," Lyra said slowly, her voice gaining strength. "There's a technology, a piece of machinery that could revolutionize space travel. It's a long-lost Skila invention, something we never got the chance to fully develop before we were pushed aside. My father has the plans, but it's unfinished. If we can complete it, we could show the galaxy that we still have something to offer." Marcus's eyes lit up with interest. "That sounds like exactly what we need. A tangible demonstration of your people's genius. Where do we start?" Lyra's heart swelled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. This was it, the chance she had been waiting for. The chance to prove that the Skila were more than just their size. "I'll need to access the archives in the Royal Vault. My father's records should have everything we need." Marcus nodded. "Then let's do it. Let's show them what you're capable of." The next few days were a whirlwind of planning, preparations, and coordination. Lyra worked closely with Marcus to assemble a small team of trusted allies. They would need engineers, scientists, and specialists who could help them decipher the complex Skila technology. It wasn't going to be easy, but the stakes had never been higher. In the Royal Vault, Lyra uncovered ancient records, blueprints, and notes that had been hidden away for centuries. The technology her people had once created was far ahead of its time, capable of harnessing the power of the stars themselves to fuel faster-than-light travel. But the designs were incomplete, the systems untested. It would take everything she had, everything her people had, to bring this dream to life. As the team worked tirelessly, Lyra's confidence grew. With each passing day, she felt the weight of her people's history, both the pain and the pride, pushing her forward. She wasn't just fighting for recognition anymore. She was fighting for her people's future. And with Marcus by her side, she knew that no matter how difficult the road ahead, they were ready to face it together. For the first time in her life, Princess Lyra felt like she was no longer fighting alone. The Skila would rise again. And this time, they would do it on their own terms. The galaxy might have forgotten them, but they would not be overlooked any longer.